Hi, I'm Harry Edwards of Apologetics.com. A couple of weeks ago, we had Calum Miller, one of our staff apologists at Apologetics.com UK, come over and be a guest on our weekly radio show. There we asked him about his previous debate, and in one particular, his debate with Peter Atkins. And that's an impressive thing all by itself, and I think that shows a lot of courage. But listening to him talk about his experience, I was encouraged by his approach to debate and its ultimate purpose. He shows a lot of maturity for someone who is now just getting into the debate scene. I believe we could all learn a thing or two about the way Calum uses the art and science of debate to persuade others about the truth claims of Christianity. We were able to take a video of this interview, and so I want to show that to you right now.
Dynamic was strange because, especially after the debate, I got a lot of things like, oh, Peter Atkins was so nasty to you and said some mean things. Whereas actually you kind of expect that in a debate context. Most people expect in a debate context there's going to be a bit more like cattiness kind of thing going on. Whereas outside of the debate, we got on fine, and we were very friendly and we exchanged emails afterwards and wished each other well and everything. So I think even though that might not necessarily have come across in the debate, we still had that kind of as a background and as an underlying thing.
Is that more of a British thing though, just trying to be proper and nice and...
To some extent, yes, but I was I was also trying to be nice, genuinely and sincerely,
Okay.
And hopefully I achieved it, and hopefully Peter Atkins thought I did as well. In terms of where I kind of got the boldness from, I think it's hard to say really. I think it's partly that I've never been too afraid of public speaking just personally, and so for some people that's just something that is either something that's true of them or something that's not so true of them. I've always been relatively okay with public speaking, but I think it's also a nice example of how God can kind of turn certain bad things about people into things for his good and for the good of others. So I think a lot of it came from just me being really mischievous and just a kind of rebellious pupil at school. I just always got into a lot of trouble in high school, and much younger I was always very kind of cheeky and would speak back to teachers and everything. And so I maybe got a part of it from that, which obviously is not a character trait that you want to kind of continue through to adulthood. But in the same way, it's something that God managed to use, I think, in that I'm fairly confident talking to kind of authority figures and people like that, and I don't feel kind of too afraid of talking to them. So that might be where it came from, if I'm being more honest about it. And so the idea here is that this is a theorem in probability theory. And the idea is that we want to know, basically, when we do historical investigation, we want to know how probable is it that Jesus rose from the dead. And that's kind of the aim of what we're doing. When we talk about all the evidence, we're talking and asking questions like, how probable does all the evidence make the resurrection? Did it probably happen? Did it probably not happen? And how much uncertainty is there? Is it something that's really, really super probable, or is it only a bit probable? Or like some people think, is it not probable at all? And so all Bayes' theorem is just one way of helping us to kind of link some of our reasoning together and understand how evidence plays into things. And so the theorem basically says that the probability of the resurrection, given all the evidence we have, so once we've taken into account all the evidence, the probability of the resurrection is proportional to two kind of factors, and these two factors multiply together to give you the final probability. And so it's a nice, neat way of breaking down kind of two aspects of how strong the case for the resurrection is. And one of these is what's called the prior probability of the resurrection, and that might be a term that people hear a lot if they start talking about probability and Bayesian kind of stuff. And that just means the probability of the resurrection before we look at the evidence. And so all you do to get from that probability, the probability of the resurrection before looking at the evidence, to get to what's called the posterior probability, the probability of the resurrection given the evidence, is you multiply it by a factor. And that factor is basically just a measure of how well the resurrection explains the evidence versus how well do alternative theories explain the evidence. So if, for example, the alternative theories to the resurrection don't explain it well, or if the alternative theories are themselves very improbable and ad hoc and contrived in order to explain the evidence, then that will favour the resurrection. And likewise, if the resurrection can explain the evidence well, if the resurrection leads us to expect the empty tomb, for example, that will count in favour of the resurrection. And so this theorem, all it is, it might look complicated and that kind of thing when you look at the symbolization and everything, but it really is just a way of breaking down these two aspects. And sometimes objections focus on different parts of that. Sometimes the objections say, well, the evidence isn't that good. We have other theories which can explain it. But then at other times, skeptics will say, actually, the evidence is quite good, but miracles or resurrections are just so improbable that even though the evidence is quite good, it's not good enough, and the resurrection doesn't come off being probable overall. And so it's a nice little way of kind of breaking that down and kind of putting those two factors together. And most of what we've been talking about today has been how well does the resurrection explain the evidence, and how badly do the alternative theories explain the evidence. But there is a lot to be said about the prior probability. How probable is the resurrection before we look at the evidence? And so a lot of philosophers will talk about that. And yeah, hopefully that's kind of a fairly useful way of explaining things that might at least get people familiar with the terminology, because it does come up occasionally, and it's nice not to be kind of completely unfamiliar with what people are doing there.